Following the German surrender in World War II, the West and Soviets came extremely close to going to war, but this was ultimately avoided as the British were unsure if America would fully support Operation Unthinkable, their plan to liberate East Germany and Poland. Sadly, all of Eastern Europe was surrendered to the Soviets, who quickly established their totalitarian regimes and the Iron Curtain. If you want to learn more about why the West didn't go through with it, watch my video on Operation Unthinkable here. But don't get down for 51,000 patriots and the 90% of commie scum who have yet to subscribe, as a few changes greatly increase the odds for the war. As an aside, Russia and Soviet will be used interchangeably through the video, as the West called Soviets Russians historically. The first change was back in 1943, with Kazimierz Sosnkowski becoming the Polish Prime Minister after the suspicious death of Władysław Sikorski. Look, I'm not saying he was murdered, but his death was very odd, and he had two near-death experiences on previous British planes, one with a bomb on board and another where the plane was tampered with, so just look into it. Anyways, Sosnkowski, the head of the Polish military, was preferred by the British and was extremely popular with his army. Additionally, he used to be the right-hand man of Pilsudski, the main leader of interwar Poland, so many within the government backed him. Although a seemingly minute change, Sosnkowski ardently opposed the Warsaw Uprising, fearing the massive civilian casualties and lack of Allied support, so he managed to prevent the operation, saving the Polish underground, whose leadership was historically wiped out in the revolt. In total, 20,000 soldiers and 200,000 civilians were spared, while Warsaw wasn't completely destroyed by the Germans. With the entire Polish underground still operating at full capacity, British intelligence in Poland was far greater, increasing their confidence to go through with Operation Unthinkable as the planners counted on more Polish support. Events in America were of far greater importance, as the Manhattan Project was completed a few months earlier. While Stalin and his spies infiltrated nearly every aspect of the nuclear program, he expected Roosevelt to rely on Soviet troops for the invasion of Japan. This went out the window with FDR's death and the ascension of Truman, who heeded the Council Secretary of Navy James Forrestal, who advised him to deal with the Soviets now rather than later. More famously, one of America's greatest generals during the war, George Patton, was clamoring for war with Russia. "We promised the Europeans freedom. It would be worse than dishonorable not to see that they have it. This might mean war with the Russians, but what of it? They have no air force and their gasoline and ammunition supplies are low. I've seen their miserable supply trains, mostly wagons drawn up by beaten old horses or oxen. I'll say this, the Third Army alone and with a damn few casualties could lick what's left of the Russians in 6 weeks. You mark my words. Don't ever forget them. Someday we'll have to fight them and it will take 6 years and cost us 6 million lives." After long discussions between Truman, Churchill, Eisenhower, Patton, Montgomery, and the Joint Staff Mission, they decided that they must attack Russia, whatever the odds. The British were elated that America was on board, so the two quickly adopted Operation Unthinkable, which was more focused on a limited invasion into Poland, to a grand campaign against Russia. Codename Operation Vasa, named after the successful Polish invasion of Russia under Sigismund III Vasa back in the 1600s. Any illusions that Russia could renegotiate over Poland and Germany were dropped, but the basics of Unthinkable remained in place, though the greatest disagreement was over France. Britain did not account for French aid as the PCF, French Communist Party, was large, strong, and loyal to Moscow, so a declaration of war on Russia from France would surely trigger civil war. Additionally, neither Britain nor America trusted de Gaulle, nor viewed France as a great power, so expected a war-ravaged Germany could be of greater assistance. However, once the sheer number of Soviets was apparent, America believed French aid, alongside all of Europe for that matter, was critical, so they were expected to assist in the invasion no matter the domestic implications. Although no one else was informed of the invasion, besides the Poles, it was apparent to Russia that something was afoot as German units were not disbanded and their equipment was being preserved. Contrary to popular belief, Unthinkable would not be a surprise for the Russians like Barbarossa was in 1941. As Jonathan Walker wrote in Operation Unthinkable, the Third World War, British plans to attack the Soviet Empire in 1945, quote, "It was likely that the Soviet forces would be alerted to a heightened Allied activity some weeks before July 1st, and would be prepared for the Allied advance. This would be even more apparent here as the West all but stopped redeployment of troops from Europe to Asia, and Soviet spies noticed a ramp up from the Polish underground, so it just couldn't be a surprise." While the pressure was mounting amongst both British and American military command to finish the war, civilians and soldiers were absolutely opposed to a conflict. For the previous 5 years, they'd been fed a steady diet of Soviet propaganda, so breaking them out would be difficult, but the Cold War shows that it wouldn't take too much. Poland, sensing the opportunity for actual liberation, published the Red Book, the list of Soviet crimes committed during their occupation of Poland, such as the Katyn, Nalaboki, Szevrien, Venetia, Volhynia, and Eastern Galicia massacres, alongside many, many others. The general ethnic cleansing of Poles by the Soviets also maimed Stalin's image. For the people of the West, All of this info, now pushed by their governments, was shocking as they quickly came to view Stalin in the same light as they had with their former adversary, the Führer. Even with the Western populace rapidly changing their stance on the USSR, there simply wasn't enough time to get them on board for yet another war, which meant they would need to take a page out of Germany's playbook. Finally, on the night of June 30th, the Allies staged a false flag attack by the Soviets to justify the war to their publics, and invaded on July 1st. World War III was underway. Though I guess this could be World War II, so let me know below whether you think this would be counted as World War II or World War III. Initial forays into Soviet-occupied lands were successful, achieving their first target line from Wrocław to Gdansk, with the Polish underground sowing chaos across communist lines. As expected, the Czechs supported the Russians, their pre-war security guarantor, while Germany was quickly rehabilitated as an equal member of Western society, joining the Allies against the barbaric Russians. As Germany was set to lose half their country because of the Soviets, and had tried to work with the Allies to fight Russia during World War II, most Germans were fine fighting alongside their Western brethren. For many, they were finishing the job of Barbarossa, and could get revenge for Soviet atrocities, murders, rapes, looting, etc. across their lands, ignoring their own actions during the war. Despite some initial Polish objections, once it was clear that the Germans were necessary for the war's victory, and they were promised expansion in Silesia, Pomerania, and East Prussia, the Poles tacitly accepted their new ally. The new German leader was Rudolf Christoph von Gersdorf, a major general of the Abwehr, the German intelligence agency, who fought in Barbarossa and uncovered the Katyn massacre. More importantly though, he participated in Operation Valkyrie, so was portrayed as a true German. Although the Western public was quickly learning about the Holocaust, this was quickly pinned solely on the National Socialists and the SS, as nearly everyone besides their top leader renounced their membership and said they were forced into it. Thus, the clean Wehrmacht myth was fraudulently propagated to make their new ally seem like a righteous group, completely unrelated to the previous regime. The war was favorable for Churchill, as British people blamed Stalin for the conflict, didn't realize they were in for more war, so expectedly re-elected their wartime hero as prime minister. It's likely an Allied victory would happen for a few key reasons. Despite having just defeated Germany, the Soviets were propped up by billions in Lend-Lease, which isn't happening here. Also, the West would learn from the German failures, and were in an infinitely better position than Germany was in terms of fuel and general resources. Sure, some Soviet cells in France and Italy would trigger civil wars and still the Allies, but with the rest of the West in war economy, these would not last long and only end up bringing Italy and France into the war under pro-American military leaders, while their communist factions were destroyed, not too dissimilar from Spain. Despite the initial manpower advantage, the Soviets already lost up to 40 million people during World War II, when accounting for the required garrisons to cover all of Eastern Europe and the need for farmers and factory workers. The long-term picture is bleak. To make matters worse, the Soviets had a massive famine from 1946 to 1947, where historically another 2 million people died. This would only be exacerbated by Western sanctions that cut off any food and material supplies to the Russians, which they depended on. Nukes would play a large part in the war as production and efficiency of the weapons grew during the conflict, but they couldn't just drop 2 bombs on Moscow and Stalingrad and expect the Soviets to make peace like Japan. With near total air superiority for the West, a tactical nuclear bombing strategy was devised and led to mass destruction across Eastern Europe and Russia. It's also probable that nukes would be deployed across the Chinese Civil War. Thankfully, the Soviets were far off from their own nuclear bombs, so would have no chance at retaliation. Ultimately, though, the main reason a Soviet collapse was probable was the ideological differences from the previous German invasion and the current Western one, as there was no push for Lebensraum or racial superiority. In the actual plans for Unthinkable, the British believed the Soviets would only fall if they were able to trigger something akin to the Russian Civil War, which almost certainly would have occurred. The biggest blunder of Barbarossa, in my opinion, was the idea that Germany could defeat Russia without winning the support of some Russian faction, and they only created the ROA, the Russian Liberation Army, when Barbarossa was already doomed. The ROA was ridiculed by the Allies as it had already distanced itself from National Socialism during the actual World War II, and it was now under the leadership of Sergei Wojciechowski. Apologies for the bad pronunciation. Wojciechowski was a Russian major general for the Whites in the Russian Civil War who fought for Czechoslovakia in the interwar period. He was extremely anti-Soviet and anti-German, having tried to convince Beneš to resist the Munich Conference and fight the Germans back in 1938, before joining the Russian All-Military Union in 1939. This was a white movement founded by General Wrangel after the exodus of white emigres across Europe. With hundreds of thousands of people being fed up enough with the Soviets to defect to Germany during World War II, where they were openly viewed as subhuman trash, it's easy to see the ROA catching on amongst Russians with sufficient Western support. Ultimately, it's impossible to know exactly how long World War III would last or how particular campaigns would go. But based on everything just stated, The Allies would win around 1950, with Europe and the world far more destroyed. No matter how you look at it, post-war Europe is a mess. Although the Allies historically attempted, allegedly, to restore borders to their pre-war days, they still failed spectacularly. Here, there was continuous war from 1939 to 1950, with tens of millions of deaths. Numerous ethnic cleansings and displacements also happened all over Europe, making predicting the final map nearly impossible. Potential nuclear radiation zones would also play a major factor on new borders, but we can't know the extent of the Allied nuclear bombing campaigns. Just look at how different Europe was before and after World War I. This would be far more extreme than that. It's possible that new nations would be artificially pushed during the war, just like Czechoslovakia was in World War I, that we simply can't know about. To further complicate matters, Germany, Poland, and the ROA were critical partners in defeating the Soviets, but none of these three would ever be able to agree on any borders, as they've had a millennium of conflicts that one temporary alliance wouldn't solve, so no matter what would agree on, there would be issues. Poland received the greatest share of Allied support, however, as Churchill originally planned Operation Unthinkable to liberate the Poles. Unfortunately, the historic aims of Poland don't exactly fit here, but their 1943 memorandum gives us an idea of their designs over Germany. Quote, the attribution of Poland, of Eastern Prussia, Danzig, Opel, Silesia, and the straightening and shortening of the Polish western frontier are in any case dictated by the need to provide for the stability and future peace, the disarmament of Germany, and the security of Poland and other countries of Central Europe. Unquote. Despite fighting for the Allies, Germany was forced to cede these lands to Poland, as this was a far better deal than the original Soviet Oder and Est line. However, if Germany was fully fighting in the war, they would have surely received other promises for concessions, so it's difficult to determine where these would actually be. Potentially, the socialist Renner government in Austria could be declared illegitimate, and another Anschluss would take place. The issue, though, was the Big Three agreed to liberate Austria back in 1943, though that could be ignored. Perhaps the Sudetenland was back on the table, as Czechoslovakia had sided with Russia. After all, the German natives hadn't been deported, and it's hard to imagine a forced expulsion to an Allied populace. Ultimately, Germany gaining that much land is unlikely, though. Poland, France, and Italy would all vehemently oppose it. Instead, Austria retained her independence, while Czechoslovakia was divided in two, Slovakia in the east, and a roughly half-Czech, half-German Bohemia in the west. Across the rest of Europe, Yugoslavia was utterly destroyed by a combination of Italians, Croatians, and Serbian royalists. The remainder of the Balkan borders are a crapshoot, as ethnic cleansing was a guarantee, so this is just one possibility I'm showing here. Hungary, who constituted a sizable part of the Allies once they were liberated, retained some lands from the Vienna Wars, though not northern Transylvania, as King Michael of Romania restored most of the pre-war Romanian borders, reacquiring Moldavia. Eastern Europe is the biggest headache to solve, due to what I call the Ukrainian conundrum. Poland was initially the third largest fighting force with Britain and America, but once the West started to defeat the Soviets, the ROA eventually outnumbered the Poles. By that point, the Russians would have accepted losing Belarus to Poland as a puppet, as they historically had less interest in it, but Ukraine was deemed a vital part of Russia by many. There were some Poles who proposed carving Ukraine in two with Russia, wishing to eradicate the Ukrainian identity and Polonize them all, after the numerous Ukrainian massacres of Poles during the wars, but Sosnkowski was a Pilsudskiite, so viewed Ukrainian sovereignty as necessary for their own survival. Eventually, a greatly reduced Ukraine was formed as a Polish puppet. Although not a perfect peace, as there would surely be more war, Poland finally achieved some sort of renewed commonwealth akin to Pilsudski's Międzymorze dream, with the Central European Confederation. Sikorski historically attempted to win Allied support for this idea and initially had Churchill on board, and with Poland under Sosnkowski, it seems likely to be created. As Haluk Kochanowski explained in The Eagle Unbowed, the Confederation would be under Polish leadership. Here it included Bohemia, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania, who were given Vilno. The Confederation was for their collective security, as none of them would be strong enough to resist Germany or Russia alone. Russia, finally freed from the Red Menace, lost lands to Finland, while Armenia and Georgia broke free in the Caucasus. The ramifications for this across the entire globe are unclear, but there are two logical outcomes. Communism was completely eradicated, and decolonization doesn't occur, at least not as quickly. Destroying the Soviets would not be enough, with Allied propaganda portraying the war as a global crusade against communism, helping in Asia just as much as in Europe. Once the communists in China were dealt with, the Kuomintang, led by Chiang Kai-shek, were able to conquer the entirety of the former Qing Empire and push far beyond, taking all of Manchuria. Korea would not be divided into the Communist North and Democratic South. The end of colonialism was heavily pushed by America after World War II historically, but here, they needed Europe to continue fighting, So, they needed them to continue extracting resources from the colonies, and they wouldn't be in a position to pressure them to do otherwise. For example, the Dutch were actively supported by America in recovering Indonesia, as oil and rubber were extremely important. Any notion of ending colonialism would be phased out by Washington to not upset their allies. Most colonial rebel groups were historically funded by the USSR, who was a little preoccupied with their own thing. And they were completely blockaded, so had no means to support some random African Communist Party halfway around the world. When the war was finally over, it's possible some efforts to promote decolonization would eventually take place, but it's unlikely these would be pushed by America. Ultimately, the destruction of the Soviet Union liberated Europe and the world from the deadly touch of communism, but came at a heavy cost. Tens of millions more died. Most of Africa and Asia still remained under the European yoke, and arguably worst of all, the horrific German crimes during the Second World War were just glossed over and ignored. Comment below if you think this is better than what historically happened. If you enjoy my work, consider supporting me on Patreon. My patrons are the only reason my channel can continue. Anyways, thanks for sticking around to the end of the video. You can watch another great one here. See ya.